Hey everyone. All right, we're going to read the next chapter, Chronicles of Narnia, The Silver Chair. I've got my David Wisner edition of the book. We're in chapter 9, which I'll read the last sentence of chapter 8 before moving on, and we'll go ahead and start. "Oh, good, how lovely," said Jill. "And we may come along to the feast tomorrow night, mayn't we? We're so longing for tomorrow night, and we do love being here while you're out. We may run over the whole castle and see everything, mayn't we? Oh, do say yes." The queen did say yes, but the laughter of all the courtiers nearly drowned out her voice. Chapter 9. How they discovered something worth knowing. The others admitted afterwards that Jill had been wonderful that day. As soon as the king and the rest of the hunting party had set off, she began making a tour of the whole castle and asking questions, but all in such an innocent, babyish way that no one could suspect her of any secret design. Though her tongue was never still, you could hardly say she talked. She prattled and giggled. She talked to everyone, the grooms, the porters, the housemaids, the ladies-in-waiting, and the elderly giant lords whose hunting days were past. She submitted to being kissed and pawed by any number of giantesses, many of whom seemed sorry for her and called her a poor little thing, though none of them explained why. She made especial friends with the cook and discovered the all-important fact that there was a scullery door which let you out through the outer wall, so you did not have to cross the courtyard or pass the great gatehouse. And in the kitchen she pretended to be greedy and ate all sorts of scraps which the cooks and scullions delighted to give her. But upstairs among the ladies she asked questions about how she would be dressed for the great feast, and how she would be allowed to sit up, and whether she would dance with some very, very small giant. And then she would put her head on one side in an idiotic fashion, which grown-ups, giant and otherwise, thought very fetching, and shake her curls and say, "Oh, I do wish it was tomorrow night, don't you? Do you think the time will go quickly then?" And all the giantess said she was a perfect little darling, and some of them dabbed their eyes with enormous handkerchiefs as if they were going to cry. "They're dear little things at that age," said one giantess to another. "It seems almost a pity." Scrub and Puddleglum both did their best, but girls do that kind of thing much better than boys. Even boys do it better than Marshwiggles. At lunchtime, something happened which made all three of them more anxious than ever to leave the castle of the Green Giants. They had lunch in the great hall at a little table of their own near the fireplace, and at a bigger table, about 20 yards away, half a dozen old giants were laughing. Their conversation was so noisy and so high up in the air that the children soon took no more notice of it than you would of owls outside the window or traffic noises in the street. They were eating cold venison, the kind of food which Jill had never tasted before, and she was liking it. Suddenly, Puddleglum turned to him, and his face had gone so pale that you could see the paleness under the natural muddiness of his complexion. He said, "Don't eat another bite." "What's wrong?" said the other two in a whisper.
"Didn't you hear what those giants were saying?" "That's a nice tender haunch of venison," said one of them. "Then that stag was a liar," said another one. "Why?" said the first one. "Oh," said the other, "they said that when he was caught, he said, 'Don't kill me, I'm tough, you won't like me.'" For a moment, Jill did not realize the full meaning of this. But she did when Scrub's eyes opened wide with horror, and he said, "So we've been eating a talking stag?" This discovery didn't exactly have the same effect on all of them. Jill, who was new to that world, was sorry for the poor stag and thought it was rotten of the giants to have killed it. Scrub, who had been in that world before and had at least one talking beast as his dear friend, felt horrified, as you might feel about a murder. But Puddleglum, who was Narnian born, was sick and faint and felt as if you would feel when you had found out you had eaten a baby.
"Well, we've brought the anger of Aslan on us," he said. "That's what comes of not attending to the signs. We're under a curse, I expect. If it was allowed, it would be the best thing we could do, to take these knives and drive them into our own hearts." And gradually, even Jill came to see his point of view. At any rate, none of them wanted any more lunch, and as soon as they thought it was safe, they crept It was now drawing near to that time of the day in which their hopes of escape descended, and all became nervous. They hung about in passages and waited for things to become quiet. The giants in the hall sat on a dreadfully long time after the meal was over. The bald one was telling a story, and when that was over, the three travelers dawdled down to the kitchen. But there were still plenty of giants there, or at least in the scullery, washing up and putting things away. It was agonizing waiting till they finished these jobs and one by one wiped their hands and went away. At last only one old giantess was left in the room. She puttered about, and at last the three travelers realized with horror that she did not intend to go away at all.
"Well, dearies," she said to them, "that job's about through. Let's put the kettle there. That'll make a nice cup of tea presently. Now I can have a good bit of rest. Just look into the scullery like good poppets and tell me if the back door is open."
Yes, it is," said Scrub.
"That's right. I always leave it open so the cat can get in and out, the poor thing."
Then she sat down in one chair and put her feet up on another.
"I don't know if I might have 40 winks," said the giantess. "If only that blamey hunting party doesn't come back too soon."
And all their spirits leaped up when she mentioned 40 winks, and flopped down again when she mentioned the return of the hunting party.
"When do they usually come back?" asked Jill. "You never can tell," said the giantess. "But there, go and be quiet for a bit, my dearies."
They retreated to the far end of the kitchen and would have slipped out into the scullery there and then if the giantess had not sat up, opened her eyes, and brushed away a fly. "Don't try it till we're sure she's really asleep," whispered Scrub, "or it'll spoil everything." So they all huddled in the kitchen, waiting and watching. And at the end, the thought that the hunters might come back at any moment was terrible, and the giantess was fidgety. Whenever they thought she had really gone to sleep, she moved. "I can't bear this," thought Jill. To distract her mind, she began looking around her, and just in front of her was a clean, wide table with 2 clean pie dishes on it and an open book. And they were giant pie dishes, of course, and Jill thought that she could lie down comfortably in one of them. And then she climbed up on the bench beside the table to look at the book. She read, "Mallard. This delicious bird can be cooked in a variety of ways." "Oh, it's a cookbook," thought Jill without much interest, and glanced over her shoulder. The giantess's eyes were shut, but she didn't look as if she were properly asleep. Jill glanced back at the book, and it was arranged alphabetically, and at the very next entry, her heart seemed to stop beating. It said, "Man. This elegant little biped has long been valued as a delicacy. It forms a traditional part of the autumn feast, and it is served between the fish and the joint. Each man—" But she could not bear to read any more. She turned round. The giantess had waked up and was having a fit of coughing. Jill nudged the other two and pointed to the book. They also mounted the bench and bent over the huge pages. Scrub was still reading about how to cook men when Puddleglum pointed at the next entry below it. It said this: "Marshwiggle. Some authorities reject this animal altogether as unfit for giants' consumption because of its stringy consistency and muddy flavor. The flavor, however, can be greatly reduced if—" Jill touched his feet and Scrub's gently. All 3 looked back at the giantess. Her mouth was slightly open, and from her nose there came a sound which at that moment was more welcome to them than any music. She snored. And now it was a question of tiptoe work, not daring to go too fast, hardly daring to breathe, out through the scullery. Giant sculleries smell horrible. Should picture. There's the giantess. Out at last into the pale sunlight of a winter afternoon, and they were at the top of the rough little path which ran steeply down, and thank heaven on the right side of the castle the city ruinous was in sight. And in a few minutes they were back on the broad, steep road which led down from the main gate of the castle, and they were in full view from every single window on that side. If it had been 1 or 2 or 5 windows, there had been a reasonable chance that no one would look out. But there were they were nearer to 50 than 5. They now realized, too, that the road on which they were, and indeed all the ground between them and the city ruinous, didn't offer as much cover as it would hide a fox. It was all coarse grass and pebbles and flat stones, and to make matters worse, they were now in the clothes that the giants had provided for them last night, except Puddleglum, who nothing would fit. Jill wore a vivid green robe, rather too long for her, and over that scarlet mantle fringed with white fur, and Scrub had a scarlet stockings, blue tunic, and a cloak, a gold-hilted sword, and a feathered bonnet. Nice bits of colour. Oh, that's the wrong voice, sorry.
Nice bits of colour you two are, muttered Puddleglum. Show up very prettily on a winter day. The worst archer in the world couldn't miss either of you if you were in range. And talking of archers, we'd be sorry not to have our own bows before long, I shouldn't wonder. Bit thin, too, those clothes of yours, are they?
Yeah, I'm freezing already, said Jill. A few minutes ago, when they had been in the kitchen, she had thought that if only they could once get out of the castle, their escape would be almost complete. She now realized that the most dangerous part of it was still to come.
Steady, steady, said Puddleglum. Don't look back. Don't walk too quickly. Whatever you do, don't run. Look as if we were just taking a stroll, and then if anyone sees us, he might just possibly not bother. The moment we look like people running away, we're done.
The distance to the city ruinous seemed longer than Jill would have believed, but bit by bit they were covering it, and then came a noise. The other two gasped. Jill, who didn't know what it was, said, "What's that?" "Hunting horn," whispered Scrub.
But don't run even now, said Puddleglum. Not till I give the word.
This time Jill couldn't help glancing over her shoulder, and there, about half a mile away, was the hunt returning from behind them on the left. They walked on, and suddenly a great clamor of giant voices arose, then shouts and hollers.
"They've seen us! Run!" said Puddleglum.
Jill gathered up her long skirts, horrible things were running in, and ran. There was no mistaking the danger now. She could hear the music of the hounds. She could hear the king's voice roaring out, "After them! After them, or we'll have new man pies tomorrow!" She was the last of the three now, cumbered with her dress, slipping on loose stones, her hair getting in her mouth, running pains in her chest. The hounds were much nearer. She had no idea what they would do. Now she had to run uphill, up the stony slope which led to the lowest step of the giant stairway. She had no idea of what they would do when they got there, or how they would be any better off if they reached the top. But she didn't think about that now. She was like a hunted animal now. As long as the pack was after her, she must run till she dropped. The marshwiggle was ahead. As he came to the lowest step, he stopped, looked a little to his right, and all of a sudden darted into a little hole or crevice at the bottom of it. His long legs disappeared into it, looking very much like those of a spider. Scrub hesitated and then vanished after him. Jill, breathless and reeling, came to the place about a minute later. It was an unattractive hole, a crack between the earth and the stone, about 3 feet long and hardly more than a foot high. You had to fling yourself flat on your face and crawl in. You couldn't do it very quickly either. She felt sure that a dog's teeth would close in on her heel before she got inside.
"Quick, quick! Stones! Fill up the opening!"
came Puddleglum's voice in the darkness beside her. It was pitch black in there, except for the gray lights in the opening by which they had crawled in. The other two were working hard. She could see Scrub's small hands and the marshwiggle's big frog-like hands, black against the light, working desperately to pile up stones. And then she realized how important this was, and began groping for large stones herself and handing them to the others. And before the dogs were baying and yelping at the cave mouth, they had pretty well filled it now. Of course, there was no light at all.
"Father in, quick!" said
Puddleglum's voice. "Let's all hold hands," said Jill. "Good idea," said Scrub, but it took them quite a long time to find one another's hands in the darkness, and the dogs were sniffing at the other side of the barrier now. "Try and see if we can stand up," suggested Scrub. They did, and found that they could, and then Puddleglum holding out a hand behind him to Scrub, and Scrub holding out a hand behind him to Jill, who wished very much that she was in the middle of one of the party and not the last. And they began groping with their feet and stumbling forward into the blackness. It was all loose stones underfoot, and then Puddleglum came up to a rock of stone. They turned a little to their right and went on. There were a good deal more twists and turns, and Jill had no sense of direction at all, and no idea where the mouth of the cave lay.
"The question is,"
came Puddleglum's voice out of the darkness ahead.
Whether taking one thing with another, it wouldn't be better to go back, if we can, and give the giants a treat to that feast of theirs, instead of losing our way in the guts of the hill where 10 to 1 there's dragons and deep holes and gases and water and let go! Save yourselves,
And after that, all happened quickly. There was a wild cry, a swishing, dusty, gravelly noise, a rattle of stones, and Jill found herself sliding hopelessly, and sliding quicker every moment down a slope that grew steeper every moment. It was not smooth, firm slope, but a slope of small stones and rubbish. Even if you could have stood up, it would have been no use. Any bit of that slope you had put your foot on would have slid away under you and carried you away with it. But Jill was more lying than standing, and the farther they all slid, the more disturbed all the stones and earth got, so that the general downward rush of everything, including themselves, got faster and louder and dustier and dirtier, and from the sharp cries and swearing of the other two, Jill got the idea that many of the stones she was dislodging were hitting Scrub and Puddleglum pretty hard. And now she was going at a furious rate and felt sure that she would be broken to bits at the bottom. And yet somehow they weren't. There was a mass of bruises, and the wet, sticky stuff on her face appeared to be blood, and such a mass of loose earth, shingle, and larger stones was piled up around her and partly over her that she couldn't get up. The darkness was so complete that it made no difference at all whether you had your eyes open or shut. There was no noise, and that was the very worst moment Jill had ever known in all her life. Supposing she was alone, supposing the other, and she heard movements around her. And presently, all three, in shaken voices, were explaining that none of them seemed to have any broken bones. "We can never get up that way again," said Scrub's voice.
"And have you noticed how warm it is?" said the voice of Puddleglum. "That means we're a long way down. Might be nearly a mile."
No one said anything. Sometime Puddleglum added,
"My tinderbox has gone."
After another long pause, Jill said, "I'm terribly thirsty." No one suggested doing anything. There was so obviously nothing to be done. For the moment they did not feel it quite so badly as one might have expected. That was because they were tired. Long, long afterward, without the slightest warning, an utterly strange voice spoke. They knew at once it was not the one voice in the whole world for which each had been secretly hoping, the voice of Aslan. It was a dark, flat voice. Almost, if you knew what that means, a pitch-black voice. It said, "What makes you here, creatures of the overland?" And that is the end of the chapter. We'll pick it up later. Have a good day. Bye.